Welcome to the Functional Aesthetician Podcast. I'm your host, Samantha Dench. Today's special guest is Elizabeth Yarnell, a naturopathic doctor. We are going to be talking about inflammation and how it shows up in the body. We are also going to talk about the signals and signs our body gives us before we start showing symptoms. And before we get to this interview, let me introduce Elizabeth. Elizabeth Yarnell has a mission to improve lives by simply changing the way we eat. She is an award-winning author, patented inventor, entrepreneur, and traditional naturopath empowering MS and other autoimmune sufferers. Elizabeth strives to help people identify the foods and lifestyle elements that are not inflammatory for them, and to inspire new ways of thinking about living and eating. After a 1999 diagnosis of multiple sclerosis forced her to take a good look at her own diet and lifestyle, she dove into researching the connection between what we eat and how we feel. The infusion cooking technique she invented and patented not only gave her a way to alter the course of her health, but offered a delicious, quick, and convenient weeknight dinner solution for just about anybody. An anti-inflammatory diet and nutritional expert offering clinical dietary consulting and other anti-inflammatory protocols for people suffering from MS and other autoimmune conditions. Elizabeth enjoys sharing knowledge and ideas about eating healthy, natural health remedies, and living a natural lifestyle on her popular blog, as well as online and in the media. Elizabeth can sometimes be found teaching cooking classes at various cooking schools. An inspirational speaker on the national circuit, Elizabeth motivates and empowers audiences to believe that small, daily choices in food and lifestyle can directly affect the way we feel. Elizabeth gives freely of her time and energies to a variety of nonprofit endeavors, and particularly for those focused on MS. Hi, Elizabeth. Welcome to the Functional Aesthetician Podcast.
Hi, Samantha. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited for our conversation today. I'm going to have you share a little background about yourself and how you got started and how you got to where you are today.
Yes, for me, it all started one night in 1999 when I went to sleep as usual, and I woke the next morning blind in my right eye.
Wow.
And in short order, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and this was a huge shock to me. I didn't really even know what MS was at the time, and I was 29 years old, about to turn 30, and my doctors were telling me that by the time I was 40, I would be in a wheelchair. And
Wow.
That was not what I had planned for my life. I was literally in so many ways just starting my life. I had just completed grad school and graduated, and I was engaged to be married. And all of a sudden, I literally had to ask my fiance if he wanted to change his mind, because
Wow.
this wasn't the future he had signed up for when he had proposed to me. So it was a huge traumatic event to be told this.
Yeah.
And on top of it, I was in pretty bad shape at the time. I was blind in my right eye, and I was freaking out about what that meant. Nobody knew how much vision I would regain or not regain. And on top of it, fatigue is a hallmark of MS, and I was exhausted. As a young business owner, this was really frightening. I didn't know what I would do for my career if I couldn't read, for example, which I couldn't in the beginning of this episode. It was actually my fiance at the time who said, maybe your diet has something to do with this. He was a competitive athlete, like 6th in the world in snowshoeing at the time. And he was all into organic foods. This was 1999. This was kind of unusual, right? I wasn't interested in that myself. In fact, my standard foods for the entire decade of my 20s were really Diet Coke, Crystal Light and gummy bears. And
sounds about right.
I didn't see anything wrong with that. But my fiance said, maybe this is why you got sick, because you are eating crap all the time. And he was right. And so that was really the first avenue I started pursuing was, what does a human body mean? What does a healthy diet mean? Because I asked my MS doctors and they would say, well, it doesn't matter what you eat. That's not going to change the trajectory of your life with MS. You're going to end up riddled with disabilities like everybody with MS, unless you take, and even if you take one of these toxic injectable drugs. At that time, there were 3 available. They had very low efficacy rates, like under 20%, about really doing anything even to slow the progression, which was the goal. There was no goal for a cure because MS is considered to be incurable.
Right.
So the goal was to just slow the progression down. But I started off being very obedient and taking the drugs, and I still kept progressing at the same rate as I was without taking the drugs. And on top of it, I was having terrible side effects. I had hives all over my body. A good day was 30 hives. A bad day was 300 hives.
Wow.
It was just so uncomfortable all the time. My body was just reacting. That was just one of my side effects. It eventually progressed to the point where every time I would inject the drug, I would have a seizure. And right. And
so it
was getting worse.
Mm-hmm.
My body was really screaming at me
right.
that it did not like this drug. And of course the doctors were like, but you have to take the drug.
Right.
That's your only option. So I started looking into diet and what is a healthy diet, and my doctors couldn't tell me anything. So this was kind of the early days of the internet.
Right.
Where I would literally go on and print out pages on my inkjet printer with still dial-up modem.
Right.
And
it would take like forever to pull up a document.
Oh, so much. And there wasn't that much out there. And
right.
It was hard to find. Searching wasn't easy. And really nobody had any information besides that this is a disease, an autoimmune degenerative disease. And basically you're just going to go downhill and there's no cure. Super, super depressing.
Yeah.
So I started off by looking at food and starting to research, well, what effect does food have on how our body feels and functions? And lo and behold, huge amounts of like a direct correlation between what you eat and how you feel and function, mm-hmm. which none of my doctors acknowledged, and still to this day really don't.
Yeah.
And so I radically changed my diet, and that's when I developed my mantra of whole foods are better than processed foods.
Yep.
And I started taking cooking classes and watching the Food Network, which was also in its infancy at the time, and experimenting around. But what I quickly realized was that cooking from scratch without processed foods was super time consuming and labor intensive, and I had MS, and fatigue was a real thing. So I started trying to figure out, well, how can I make this easier for myself if I'm really dedicated to having a whole foods-based diet and I want to get away from processed foods, which I think already at that time I was really discovering were not the right thing for me, even though I had been an enormous devotee of aspartame, right, equal. I was a child of the 80s. We thought that was the best thing ever.
Right, because sugar was bad.
Sugar and fattening, right? And all of and look, you can have this Diet Coke and it has like 0 calories, and you can have as much as you want, right? And that's a better option for you. Yeah. Oh my gosh, all of these falsehoods that we were fed. We just didn't know any better. I try not to blame myself for how I ended up.
No, that's true. We didn't know any better. We were just doing what we thought was right for ourselves.
Right. And even to this day, I still hear that advice. Oh, if you want to be healthier, switch to diet sodas. And I'm horrified.
You're like cringe.
Horrified
I
when
know.
I hear people say that who are
Yeah.
in health, because no, I would much rather my clients have a regular Coca-Cola than a diet Coca-Cola. If you're going to have a soda,
Yeah.
go for the regular one and try to get the one with real sugar instead of high fructose corn syrup. But even so, like, stay away from that aspartame. It is bad stuff.
Yeah.
So I started trying to figure out how to cook healthier foods more easily and more quickly so that I could follow this whole foods-based diet and hopefully improve my health. And I really wasn't finding much. I still have bookshelves of cookbooks that I would go through, and again, taking cooking classes. Then one night, my husband and I were watching late night TV, and we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't have cable TV back in the days when there were 3 or 4 channels on TV. And this is all dated, right? So we were watching late night TV. There was nothing on, and we watched this infomercial, and this guy came out and he said, look, I can make this entire meal in this one countertop appliance. And he puts in dry rice and a can of tomatoes, and then he puts a metal grate over it, like a barbecue grill type grate. And then he puts chicken breasts on that, and then another metal grate, and brownies on top of that, covers the whole thing with a dome, plugs it in, turns it on. And I looked at that and I'm like, that is brilliant.
Right.
How can I create my whole foods based meal in just one cooking utensil? But I don't have that countertop appliance that guy was using on the commercial, and I don't know how it's all working, and I don't really care about the brownies, and I don't have any of those metal grates. But I thought, okay, well, I just received this cast iron Dutch oven as a wedding gift, and we had looked at it and thought, oh, this is just so little and cute, but what do we cook in this? Never had a cast iron pot before. And so I just went over to my oven and I turned it on, and I thought, oh, well, that countertop appliance probably gets pretty hot. It was cooking pretty fast. So I'm going to crank up my oven to 450 degrees. And you can totally see like my ignorance at that time, because what do you cook at 450 degrees? Like bread and pizza maybe. But I pulled out fish fillets. I had some frozen fish fillets in my freezer, and I had some vegetables from my garden, and I had some fresh herbs, and I just threw it all in to this cast iron Dutch oven, put the lid on it, and put it into this 450 degree oven. And lo and behold, in about half an hour, 45 minutes, it started to smell like dinner. And that just became the way that we cooked. And we called it Glorious One Pot Meals. And I really didn't think that much of it until my college roommate came to visit for a week. And at the end of the week, she said, would you please teach me how to cook like you cook? And I said, but your mom's from Italy. You know how to cook. I see you cook. She's like, but it's not as easy, and it doesn't taste as fresh and clean as what you do. And I said, oh, okay. So I wrote it down, and I wrote down what eventually became a cookbook. It was a bunch of iterations, and I would print it out and give it as wedding gifts and hand it out to my MS support group and things like that. And it eventually became a cookbook called Glorious One Pot Meals. And someone advised me to apply for a patent, and I received 2 patents on my process for cooking healthy whole food meals in cast iron Dutch oven in 45 minutes, which is the normal way to use a cast iron Dutch oven. But Glorious One Pot Meals, and now I've sold the cookbook to Random House, and then we've sold close to 80,000 copies now. So it's still selling, still going strong. But so my entire career started to take classes in natural health and nutrition, and I went back to school and I got a doctorate in naturopathy, which is natural health. And then in 2011, I opened my clinic, which is called the Inflammation Academy, and it's a virtual clinic and community. And now I have a podcast called the Inflammation Investigator, and basically my whole life is about inflammation. So yes, it's all came out of this diagnosis of multiple sclerosis and that blindness I had that one morning in 1999.
And now you can see.
And now, so I've gotten, I think my doctor said like 93% of my vision back.
That's
the
amazing.
the way that multiple sclerosis works is the inflammation is what causes damage, and the faster that you can resolve that inflammation, the less likely that damage will be permanent. So
Right.
really that's the whole foundation of what we do in the Inflammation Academy is how do we remove those triggers of inflammation from your body so that you don't sustain long-term lasting damage that can't be reversed.
That's why I wanted to have you on here, because I feel like inflammation, it's a buzzword and everybody hears it and they don't really understand what inflammation actually is. So can you define inflammation?
It's true that it's a buzzword now, but in 2011, when I went to my literary agent and I said, I'm ready to write my next book, and she said, great, people are going to love another cookbook from you. And I said, I don't want to write another cookbook. I want to write a book about inflammation. And she said, nobody knows what that is. And in 2011, she was totally right. But I
Yeah.
think now there's become more awareness of what is inflammation. So there are two types of inflammation. There's acute inflammation and there's chronic inflammation. Acute inflammation is that inflammation that you have when you twist your ankle, when you're in a class or something and your ankle blows up like a softball, and then you stay off it for a few days and that resolves. That inflammation is very healthy. That's what our body does to immobilize that joint so it has the opportunity to heal and recover. That is acute inflammation. We can see other types of acute inflammation can be more destructive, like anaphylaxis, people who are allergic to peanuts or shrimp, and they get exposed, they eat a peanut and they blow up and they'll actually die because
Right.
of all of the inflammation that's clogging their airways. Chronic inflammation is something completely different. It is not always related to injury, although it can be. Mostly it's related to internal workings of your immune system, because inflammation is one of the tools that our immune system has to fight off foreign invaders. Typical foreign invaders might be bacteria or virus. And we have the tools of antibodies, which match up to bacteria and kill them to get them out of our system. And we have fever or high heat, which kills viruses. Viruses don't like or can't live in high heat temperatures, which might make you think about reaching for a pain reliever or a fever reducer the next time you have a viral infection like the flu. Because that's actually our body, that fever is our body working. But chronic inflammation usually comes, especially when it's considered autoimmune, it comes when the immune system is continually sending out these inflammatory mediators, which are chemicals that are released by our white blood cells, which are the protectors of the body. And doctors can't figure out what is going on to trigger those mediators to be released. I believe in my theories, in my work, now 15 years in the clinic and more than 25 years living with multiple sclerosis, is that there are triggers that we just haven't been looking for them in the right places. They're not the typical triggers that we've been taught to look for, like a virus or a bacteria. And instead, those triggers might be things like parasitic infection. It could be food sensitivities. It could be toxin exposures like molds.
Right.
There are all kinds of things that can trigger continual or chronic inflammation in the body. And what the conventional medical community, the allopathic Western medical community, does for these conditions when you are stuck in this cycle of chronic inflammation is they will give you medications, just like those medications that were offered to me for multiple sclerosis, that either suppress the entire immune system, because let's just shut it down. If it's continually working and we don't know why, just shut the whole thing down. That leaves you kind of vulnerable to
Right.
passing passing viruses. Like we just went through this pandemic with this floating virus in the air. And if your immune system is compromised and shut down, then you're much more vulnerable to things like that. Or the other approach is to just dampen the pain receptors, which neither of those approaches actually addresses or looks at, well, why is this happening in the first place?
Right.
And that's what I'm concerned about. I want to know, why is this happening in the first place? And therefore, once we can figure out what's triggering the inflammation, we can identify it and we can avoid it, take it out of our life. Maybe it's something as simple as what you're eating every morning for breakfast, which for me, right?
Right.
My gummy bear breakfasts. Or we can delve deeper into, I use functional medicine testing. We test blood and urine and even DNA to see what's going on. What is triggering this constant inflammation response in your body? And let's get rid of it so that you don't need the medication and you don't have to suppress your entire immune system and become immunocompromised. If you don't have inflammation, then really, you don't really have symptoms.
What does inflammation look like in the body? I know most people associate inflammation with like joint pain and, like swelling or anaphylactic responses, but like how else can inflammation show up?
Such a good question, because this is something people don't realize. So I like to kind of start at the head. So inflammation in the head, that can look like a headache, that can look like migraines, it can look like brain fog, can look like memory issues, can look like emotional issues, depression, anxiety, short-temperedness. Those can all be related to inflammation in the brain. Inflammation in the sinuses, that can look like runny or stuffy nose or sinus pain, or even clearing of the throat, because that's sinus dripping back down your throat. Inflammation in your chest, that can look like high blood pressure, that can look like heart arrhythmia, it can look like asthma, it can look like respiratory issues. Inflammation in your gut, that can look like digestive issues. So any type of acid reflux or a lot of bloating or gas or burping or cramping when you eat. Inflammation in your bowels can look like diarrhea or constipation, or you can kind of cycle between the two of them. Inflammation in your joints, as you mentioned before, we can call that arthritis. We can call that fibromyalgia. We can just call it aging, right? The creakiness, that is often inflammation. I have lots of clients who are in their 70s who feel better than ever before, and their joints don't give them any trouble once we remove those inflammatory triggers from their lives. So inflammation can really turn up. Fatigue is a hallmark of inflammation, because really, let's think about the amount of energy it takes for your body to maintain that state of inflammation where the cells are actually swollen. And even if you can't see it, like you can see that swollen ankle when you twist it, whenever you have inflammation, there's always swollen cells. And that's what we like to call leaky gut, right? That's swollen cells in the gut. And that always accompanies any inflammation. And the amount of metabolic energy that it takes to sustain that kind of inflammation is tremendous. So fatigue is part and parcel of it.
I want to talk about leaky gut because you just mentioned that. And I feel like that's a big one for triggering inflammation.
Yes. So leaky gut, if you haven't heard of it, but what does it really mean?
Right.
It means, so in medical speak, it's called intestinal permeability. And that just means what happens in leaky gut is there's inflammation that's going on in the body. And let's clarify, inflammation is systemic. It goes through your bloodstream. It is triggered by your white blood cells. So that means that it goes everywhere your blood goes, which is everywhere, right?
Everywhere.
You have blood everywhere. So in your gut, what happens with this inflammation is the cells that are lining your stomach and bowels, those cells need to be really tightly paved together like a bathroom floor so that they're watertight and they can hold all of those digestive liquids in inside the stomach as everything gets digested. Now, when we have leaky gut, that means the cells that line the stomach and bowels are swollen, and now they're starting to gap between the other cells. And once that happens, then we can get undigested food particles and stomach acids, things like that, seeping out of the stomach and intestines and ending up in the body where they shouldn't be, which then, of course, triggers more activity by the white blood cells. They're like, oh my gosh, what is this doing here? We need to go clean that up. So it leads you into this vicious cycle of chronic inflammation. And leaky gut is almost always indicated when people have, is always indicated when people have a chronic autoimmune or other kind of chronic illness, whether or not it's diagnosed. Yes. So before we move on to that, what I didn't talk about is what inflammation in the skin looks like, right? Oh. So let's bring this back to the Esthetician's Podcast.
Yeah.
Inflammation in the skin could look like ruddiness or rosacea on your skin, could look like a rash, could look like itchy spots. It could look like skin, like eczema or discoloration in the skin. All of those things are indications of inflammation in the skin. And honestly, I think that by the time inflammation comes out of your skin, let's not forget acne. Right. By the time it comes out of your skin, that's really your body saying that all of your other elimination pathways have failed. And so things have to be eliminated through the skin, which is, of course, our largest organ.
So we've been talking a lot about causes. Why don't we talk a little bit about like treatment? Like when you have somebody that comes in with leaky gut or with chronic inflammation, like what would be something that you would start them on, or what would be like a good healing path for them?
Yes. So what to do? There are a lot of different steps, but of course, lots of doctors have templates. And what I like to do is make a very customized protocol and plan for everybody. And for that, I use very scientifically based functional testing of blood and urine and DNA we're doing now too. But even if you don't go in for all of the testing, which is a commitment, and I understand that, and it is expensive, there's still lots of things that you can do to start your anti-inflammatory journey on your own. And some of the first things you can do is just start reading labels on foods. So when we were kids, there weren't descriptive ingredient labels on foods. That came about, I want to say, maybe in the 80s, 1980s. But before that, you kind of were at the mercy of food producers and the processed foods that they were making, and you didn't really know what was in them. So now at least you can pretty much know what's in them. There are some misleading terms that are used, but on the whole, you can know what's in them. So there are common things that are added to processed foods that can trigger inflammation. And pretty much these are things that don't come from nature. So they might be food dyes and colors. In the 1930s, when food dyes were first brought before the FDA, they were sourced from coal. Now food dyes and colors are sourced from petroleum. We've been really brainwashed to think that our foods need to be very brightly colored.
Yes.
Those are petroleum dyes, and a lot of people are sensitive to those, and they can cause inflammation. And once you start reading labels, you'll be like, whoa, I can't believe food dyes are in everything. Like, why is there food dye in my toothpaste? Why is there food dye in my laundry detergent? Right? Why are we adding dyes to things we're using to clean our clothes or clean our dishes? Why is Dawn dishwashing liquid green? Once you start looking, you'll see them. They're everywhere. They're in our lotions. They're in our skincare, our sunscreens. Yep. They're in our makeup, our personal care products, everywhere. They're even in things as intimate as tampons and toilet paper. A lot of people I find are exposed from their toilet paper. They use like scented colored toilet paper, and they wonder why they have anal itching. And that might be why, because you can absorb it through your skin, which kind of brings us to these fragrances. that are used in everything. And those are all created in one of 6 or 7 multinational laboratories that employ hundreds of chemists who sit around and tinker with molecules to make them imitate scents and flavors that exist in nature. And then they ship those formulas out across the world. And those are in all of our products, from Pine Sol cleaning to Tide laundry detergent to that strawberry milkshake at McDonald's.
Crazy.
It's crazy. And even when we think we're doing something really good for our health, like instead of choosing a soda pop, we're choosing maybe a carbonated flavored water. Oh, that's got to be a better choice, right?
It's natural.
Right. It's natural and it has no calories. Right. And you look at the ingredients and it says, oh, it has artificial flavor, or it might even say natural flavor, which is a loophole, and carbonated water. And you're like, oh, what could be wrong with this? Well, once you go through the process of clearing out all of these potential allergens or antigens, things that are potentially causing inflammation in your body, you can start to do your own tests. Like for myself, when I drink a carbonated flavored water, I immediately almost have repercussions. I might have stomach cramping. I might have to go lie down and literally fall asleep for a couple hours. And then usually for me, within 24 hours, my eyelids will start to peel.
Oh, wow.
And first, I know, blepharitis, right? So first I'll notice that my eyebrows they're kind of itchy and they feel sandy, like I've spent the day at the beach. And I'll be like, why are my eyebrows sandy? Well, that's the first sign for me. And then it will move down onto my eyelids. And if I continue to expose myself to that artificial flavor, then eventually those scales will become large enough that they'll start flaking off and bleeding on my eyelids. I know enough now that I can tell, like, oh, this came from drinking that carbonated flavored water the other day.
Yeah, exactly.
And I shouldn't do that.
So much. I was like, we could do a whole episode on that.
Yes. And a lot of these things are labeled as, quote, natural flavors on the label. Yet that's a FDA loophole, and there could be up to 100 chemicals behind something called natural flavors. And they're not required to tell you what they are because that's considered proprietary knowledge, just like the formula for Coca-Cola is proprietary knowledge. So woe be to you if you are sensitive to one or more of these chemicals. You'll never figure out which one because, unfortunately, too, not all natural flavors are the same. They have different formulas to make these natural flavors, and there's no way to know. Yeah. There's no way to know. So that's one of my big soapboxes lately, is these natural flavors that are everywhere. They're everywhere. Yeah. Like I see them in ketchup. I see them in mustard. I see them like, why are you putting that in my mustard? Mustard has plenty of flavor. I don't need, I see them in like canned bone broth, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. Like, oh, this is so good for me. I should get this bone broth. Well, why are you adding natural flavors to bone broth that has plenty of flavors? It doesn't need more flavors. And the truth is that the companies are adding them to increase shelf life.
I want to ask one more question. How is inflammation sabotaging your life?
So what a lot of people don't realize is that what is going on in their body is a result of chronic inflammation, and that inflammation is holding them back from leaping ahead in their career or their academic world, or being more present in their relationships, or keeping them back from the things they had thought they wanted to do because of pain, discomfort, fatigue, all of these signs and symptoms that are really indicative of inflammation, but we might just brush it off. Like, oh, I always bloat after I eat.
Right.
Or, no, I need to get 10 hours of sleep a night, or I can't function. Or even I can't function before I've had coffee and caffeine and that artificial stimulant. And then I crash at around 2 o'clock. There's all kinds of ways that inflammation is really what's behind what's going on in your body, and that's holding you back from everything that you can be and holding you back from the future that you want for yourself.
And I feel like a lot of those subtle signals we blow off because we don't realize that that's inflammation. I can't tell you how many people have come to see me and they're like, oh, I'm always bloated. I always have headaches. I always have joint pain, or I'm always like stiff. This has been going on for years. Now you're actually seeing symptoms because you ignored those signs for years and years.
Exactly. And in fact, these things can be so commonplace that we don't realize that it is a sign of inflammation. I mean, there's something like 7 million prescriptions for proton pump inhibitors in this country, in the US, every year. And that's for people who have digestive discomfort.
Yeah.
So I have an inflammation quiz that is really helpful if you give yourself a good 10 or 15 minutes to go through it. It's not short. It's a little bit of a commitment, but it goes through 80 or more signs and symptoms of inflammation that you might not have recognized are actually signs of inflammation. And it can be really eye-opening to do that quiz. And you can get to that at my website at elizabethyarnell.com.
Okay. I'll drop the link below so they can click on it and take the quiz.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, before we close, do you have any tips you want to send our listeners home with?
So my big tips is start reading labels and really try to avoid. The good thing about our world right now in the US, most parts of the US, is that you have options. You don't have to pick the item from the shelf that has full of chemicals, things you can't pronounce, things you can't identify. You can find something that is cleaner and choose that instead. And that will go a long way toward helping you start to clean up all of the random inflammation in your body that is sabotaging your life.
Yeah. So how can our listeners connect with you?
The best way to find me is through my website, elizabethyarnell.com. You can book a complimentary naturopathic health assessment with me, or you can join a free Q&A call that I do on a regular basis and ask me anything about what's going on in your body, and I will let you know what I think it's from, what I think is going on. So there's lots of ways. I also have a group program that meets about every other week, and that is a very affordable way to come into this community and find out. Not only do you get to have these live sessions with me that are also recorded, but you get access to my online environment in the Inflammation Academy, and that has lots of anti-inflammatory recipes and videos and resources, handouts, all kinds of great information for this journey.
I love that. That's awesome. We have a community. That's my goal for like a year from now. I have so much going on right now, but yeah, I would love to create my own little community. I think it's nice to just have the space for people to ask questions and just know that they feel seen and heard.
Yes, and really to get help and input from others in the community too who've been through this and who know what you're going through, because that can really go a long way toward helping you figure out what's going on and where you're going from here. I just did actually a community session open to the public recently about collective trauma and how that contributes to inflammation, because everything in this world is so traumatic, what's happening right now. And I was feeling overwhelmed myself. And so I put it out there, and lots of people came and joined in, and we talked about ways that we can reduce that stress from that collective trauma in ourselves, whether that's through individual actions for ourselves, or even taking concrete actions in our world and in our country to feel less helpless, which can help too.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here today.
Samantha, this was such a pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I always enjoy our conversations.
Thank you for listening. Today we had on our special guest, Elizabeth Yarnell. We talked about inflammation and how it shows up in the body and on the skin, and the negative impact it can have on our health. We also talked about how to pay attention to signals and signs of inflammation in your body before you get sick. Please check the show notes to connect with Elizabeth. Make sure to tune in next Tuesday to episode 23. We are going to talk about chronic stress, PCOS, and nervous system regulation, especially for overachieving moms who never stop pushing through. You don't want to miss this one. And always remember, you deserve to love the skin you're in.